Tonight, before sleep gently finds you, before your thoughts become as quiet as the stars above, allow yourself to enter a story that has been carried through countless generations, not because anyone wrote it down, but because it continued to live inside the hearts of those who heard it. No one remembers the name of the first traveler who climbed the mountain. No one remembers the season. Some say it was late autumn, when the maple leaves covered the temple steps like scattered embers. Others believe it was the beginning of winter, when every sound seemed softer beneath fresh snow. Perhaps both stories are true, or perhaps neither matters. Because the questions that brought him there have lived inside every human heart. Questions that quietly appear whenever someone we love takes their final breath. Questions that no amount of wealth can answer. Questions that even kings have carried into old age. Tonight, you may recognize those questions yourself. Take one slow breath. Feel the air entering your lungs. Notice how naturally it leaves again, without effort, without struggle, for countless years. Your breath has been arriving and departing in this gentle rhythm most days. You hardly notice until one day, someone else's breathing stops, and suddenly, every breath feels precious. Far beyond the noise of crowded cities, beyond roads that merchants no longer traveled, past forests where ancient cedar trees had watched over the mountains for centuries, there stood a small Buddhist temple. Its wooden gate leaned slightly with age. Its stone lanterns were covered in moss. Every evening, when the moon climbed above the distant peaks, warm light spilled softly through paper windows. No grand halls. Only quiet simplicity. The monks who lived there believed that wisdom grew best where silence was allowed to bloom. People rarely visited. Those who did seldom came searching for miracles. They came carrying invisible burdens, regret, fear, loneliness, grief. Some stayed only one night. Others remained for months. Many left without realizing that the answers they had sought had quietly changed into different questions. One cold evening, a young traveler began climbing the mountain path. His name was Kenji. He had walked for 3 days without caring where the road ended. His sandals were worn thin. Dust clung to the hem of his robe. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth around him. Yet he barely noticed. Inside his mind, only one memory remained: his father's final breath. It had happened just before sunrise. The room had been silent, except for the soft crackling of a small fire. His father had been ill for many months. His breathing had become slower each day. Then, without warning, it simply stopped. No thunder, no great mystery, no final speech, only silence. The kind of silence that changes a person's life forever. Kenji had waited. Surely something would happen. Surely there would be some sign, some light, some voice, some answer. But the room remained exactly as it had always been. Outside, morning birds began singing. The village slowly awakened. Someone swept the street. Children laughed in the distance. The world continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everything had changed. For many nights afterward, Kenji could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he remembered the peaceful expression upon his father's face. Not fear, not pain, only peace. That troubled him even more. How could someone smile while leaving the world behind? Where had that smile come from? Where had his father gone? Or had he gone anywhere at all? Neighbors offered comforting words. He is in a better place. The ancestors are watching over him. He will always be with you. Each sentence sounded kind, yet none answered the question that burned quietly within him. One afternoon, an elderly woodcutter visited the village. While sharing tea beneath an old persimmon tree, he spoke of a temple hidden high among the northern mountains. "They say an old monk lives there," the woodcutter whispered. "He never tells people what they wish to hear. He only tells stories." Kenji frowned. "Stories cannot answer a question like mine." The woodcutter smiled. "Perhaps, but neither can arguments." Before leaving, the old man added one final sentence. "The monk has buried more friends than most people have ever known. If anyone understands death, it may be him." That evening, Kenji packed only what he could carry: a spare robe, a small pouch of rice, his father's old wooden prayer beads. Nothing more. He did not tell anyone goodbye. Some journeys begin without certainty, only necessity. The mountain path grew steeper with every hour. Clouds drifted low between the trees. The cries of distant crows echoed across empty valleys. As darkness slowly covered the forest, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, tiny, silent, weightless. Each one disappeared the moment it touched the earth. Kenji paused, watching them, for reasons he could not explain. The falling snow reminded him of breathing. Each flake appeared, then vanished. Yet the snowfall itself never seemed to end. He continued climbing, long after the moon had risen, long after every village light had disappeared below the mountain. Finally, near midnight, he saw it. A single lantern glowing warmly through the trees, not bright enough to conquer the darkness, only bright enough to welcome those who had become lost. Above the wooden gate hung a weathered bell. It moved gently in the wind, without making a sound. Kenji stood there for several moments. His hand rested upon the cold wood of the gate, for the first time since his father's passing. His question felt heavier than his grief. Slowly, he pushed the gate open. The garden beyond was almost completely silent. Fresh snow rested upon carefully placed stones. A narrow stream flowed beneath a small wooden bridge. The fragrance of cedar smoke drifted from somewhere deeper within the temple. Near the center of the garden, an elderly monk was sweeping fallen leaves. Even though new snow continued covering the ground behind him, Kenji watched in confusion. Every leaf the monk gathered, another quietly landed. Every step he cleaned, the wind gently covered once again. Still, the old monk never hurried, never sighed, never stopped. After several minutes, without turning around, the monk spoke. His voice was calm, as though he had been expecting someone. "You have climbed a long way." Kenji bowed deeply. "I have." The monk continued sweeping. "And yet, I wonder, did you come searching for this temple? Or did your sorrow simply bring you here?" The young traveler opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. The old monk finally turned. His hair was silver, his robes were plain. Its eyes reflected neither sadness nor joy, only a quiet understanding that seemed older than the mountains themselves. Instead of asking the traveler's name, instead of asking why he had come, the monk smiled gently and said, "You must be cold. Come, the tea is still warm." Snow continued falling as Kenji stepped quietly through the wooden gate. The old monk walked ahead without saying another word. His broom rested lightly across one shoulder. Each step he took was slow and deliberate, leaving gentle footprints upon the fresh blanket of snow. No lanterns lined the stone path. Only the pale moon illuminated the garden, yet somehow there was enough light. The temple itself was smaller than Kenji had imagined. Its wooden walls had darkened with age. The roof sagged ever so slightly beneath the weight of winter. A small stream circled the garden before disappearing into the forest below, even in the cold. The water never stopped moving, The monk slid open a paper door. Warm air drifted outside, carrying the comforting scent of cedar wood and freshly brewed tea. Inside, there were no expensive decorations, no golden statues, no treasures, only woven mats upon the floor, a simple wooden table, a small clay kettle gently steaming over glowing coals, and a single candle burning beside an old bronze bell. Nothing seemed extraordinary, yet everything felt peaceful. The monk gestured toward the table. "Please." Kenji removed his sandals and quietly entered. For a while, neither of them spoke. The old monk poured tea into 2 worn clay cups. His movements were unhurried, almost musical. Steam curled upward between them before disappearing into the cool air. Kenji wrapped both hands around the warm cup. Only then did he realize how cold his fingers had become during the long climb. The monk smiled faintly. Sometimes, the body understands its needs before the mind does. Kenji nodded politely. Still, the question inside him refused to rest. He had climbed 3 days through mountains, crossed frozen rivers, endured sleepless nights, not for tea, not for silence. Finally, he gathered the courage to speak. "My father died." The monk lowered his eyes. "I am sorry for your loss. He was a good man." Kenji blinked. "You never met him?" "No, but someone raised the young man sitting before me, and kindness rarely grows by accident." The words settled gently between them. Kenji had expected wisdom, perhaps even mysterious answers. Instead, the monk had simply spoken of kindness. The young traveler looked into his cup. Tiny ripples danced across the surface. My father smiled. The monk listened. He smiled just before his last breath. Kenji's voice became quieter. "I don't understand. He was leaving everything behind. Our home, our village, my mother, me. Why would someone smile at a moment like that?" Outside, a soft breeze passed through the bamboo. The stalks knocked gently together, like distant wind chimes. The monk lifted his cup. Instead of answering, he asked another question. "Have you ever watched the moon reflected upon a lake?" Kenji looked surprised. "Yes. What happens when the wind disturbs the water? The reflection breaks apart. And what happens when the water becomes still again? The moon appears once more." The monk nodded. "Did the moon ever truly disappear?" Kenji remained silent. "No, it only seemed to disappear." The monk smiled. "Our minds often mistake appearance for reality." He placed his cup back upon the table. "When someone dies, what disappears is the body we can touch, the voice we can hear, the face we have loved." He paused. "But grief often asks questions that cannot be answered by looking only with the eyes." The room fell quiet once again. The fire crackled softly outside. Snowflakes drifted through the moonlight without making a sound. After several moments, the monk stood. "Come." Kenji followed him outside. They crossed the garden until they reached the small wooden bridge below. The stream continued flowing beneath a thin layer of ice. The monk pointed toward the water. "Tell me, what do you see?" "A stream. And yesterday, a stream. And tomorrow, it will still be a stream." The monk smiled gently. "Will it?" Kenji frowned. "Of course." The old monk bent down and picked up a small leaf trapped beneath the snow. He released it into the current. The leaf drifted away immediately. "Can you find that leaf again?" "No." "Can you touch the same water twice?" Kenji hesitated. "No, the water has already moved." The monk nodded. "Yet we continue calling it the same stream." They watched the water together. "It changes every moment. New water arrives, old water leaves. The stream is never the same. And yet, we give it one name. Kenji looked thoughtfully into the current. The monk continued. The Buddha often invited people to observe nature before trying to understand themselves. A river teaches impermanence. A tree teaches patience. A mountain teaches stillness. We spend our lives searching for answers, while the world quietly offers them every day. The young traveler watched another leaf disappear around the bend. His father's face entered his thoughts once more. Then, my father was like this stream. The monk smiled. No, he was never the stream. Kenji looked confused. The monk gently touched his own chest. He was the life flowing through it. Another silence settled over them. This one felt different, less painful, more curious. Above the forest, clouds slowly drifted away. For the first time, that night, the full moon appeared clearly in the sky. Its reflection shimmered across the moving water. Beautiful, whole, untouched. Though the stream beneath it never stopped changing, the monk folded his hands inside his sleeves. Tomorrow morning, I will tell you a story, not about death, but about a fisherman and an empty boat. Kenji almost smiled. An empty boat seemed like a strange answer to the question that had haunted him for weeks. Yet something inside him no longer felt the need to demand immediate certainty. Perhaps, for the first time, he was willing to listen before searching for conclusions. Together, the two figures stood quietly beside the stream, listening not to words, but to water, flowing patiently through the sleeping mountain. Morning arrived quietly upon the mountain. Long before the sun rose above the eastern peaks, the temple was already awake. Not because of bells, not because of voices, but because the mountain itself had begun another day. A gentle mist rested among the cedar trees. Drops of water clung to every pine needle, reflecting the first pale light of dawn. Somewhere beyond the forest, a cuckoo called only once. Then silence returned. Kenji opened his eyes. For the first time since his father's passing, he realized he had slept through the entire night. No dreams, no sudden awakening, only peaceful darkness. He lay still for several moments, listening. The stream outside continued its endless conversation with the stones. The wind whispered softly beneath the temple roof. Even the silence seemed alive. When he stepped outside, he found the old monk already sweeping the stone courtyard. Not because it was dirty. A few leaves had fallen during the night. Nothing more. Yet the monk swept each one as though it deserved his complete attention. Kenji waited until the sweeping was finished. Master. The old monk leaned the broom against the wall. Good morning. You slept well. Kenji looked surprised. And how did you know? The monk smiled. Your eyes are no longer arguing with yesterday. The young traveler lowered his head. Perhaps that was true. Grief still lived inside him, but it no longer shouted. It whispered. The monk picked up 2 empty bamboo baskets. Walk with me. Together, they followed a narrow trail leading away from the temple. The forest smelled of wet earth and cedar. Small beams of sunlight slipped between ancient branches. Tiny birds hopped from stone to stone beside the path. No one hurried. After nearly half an hour, the trees slowly opened. Before them lay a quiet river. Its surface reflected the morning sky so perfectly that the clouds seemed to float beneath the water. Near the shore rested an old wooden boat. It was tied loosely to a weathered post. The paint had almost disappeared. Its edges had been worn smooth by decades of wind and rain. No fishermen, no nets, no oars, only the empty boat. The monk placed one basket upon the ground. Then he sat upon a flat stone facing the river. Kenji sat beside him. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched gently between them until it became comfortable. Finally, the monk pointed toward the boat. "Tell me what you see." Kenji smiled faintly. "You asked me the same question yesterday, and today your answer may be different." Kenji looked carefully. "I see an old boat. It has been abandoned. It no longer serves anyone." The monk nodded slowly. "So you believe its purpose has ended?" "I do." The old monk bent down and picked up a small pebble. He tossed it lightly into the river. Concentric circles spread across the water before fading away. Without taking his eyes from the river, he began to speak. "Many years ago, a fisherman lived beside this river. He was neither rich nor famous. He owned only this boat. Each morning before sunrise, he crossed the water to check his nets. He always returned with enough fish for his family, and whenever the catch was plentiful, he quietly left baskets of fresh fish outside the homes of widows and elderly villagers." Kenji listened closely. The monk continued. "He never asked for thanks. In fact, many people never knew who had left the gifts. The breeze carried the scent of fresh water through the valley. The empty boat rocked gently against the shore. One winter, the fisherman became ill. He knew his body was growing weaker, so he called his grandson to his side. The monk smiled softly. He did not speak about death. He did not speak about fear. He simply handed the boy a pair of worn wooden oars. "One day," he said, "someone will need this boat more than I do." Kenji stared at the boat. What happened to him? He died before spring arrived. And the boat, the grandson continued using it for many years. He crossed the same river. He fed the same village. He taught his own children to do the same. The monk turned toward Kenji. "So tell me, when the fisherman died, did his kindness die with him?" Kenji answered almost immediately. "No," it continued. "Through the grandson," the monk nodded. "And through every hungry family that received food, and through every child who learned generosity, and through every life quietly touched by his compassion." The old monk looked back toward the boat. "Many people think karma is something mysterious. They imagine an invisible judge keeping records. But look at this river." He traced a line across the flowing water with his finger. "When a single drop enters the current, it changes the path of every drop behind it. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gently, continuously. That is how karma moves. Not as punishment, not as reward, but as the natural unfolding of every intention." Kenji remained silent. He remembered something his father had done years before. A freezing winter. A stranger collapsed outside their home, without hesitation. His father carried the man inside, fed him, shared blankets, stayed awake through the night. The stranger had recovered by morning. Kenji had forgotten the man's face, but he remembered his father's smile, the same smile he had seen during that final breath. The monk's voice interrupted his thoughts. "If your father planted compassion, and you continue planting compassion, where does his life truly end?" Kenji looked down at his hands. For the first time, he could not answer, because perhaps there was no place where it ended, only places where it continued. A gust of wind drifted across the river. The rope securing the old boat loosened slightly, very slowly. The boat began floating away from the shore. Kenji stood abruptly. "Master, the boat?" The monk did not move. He simply watched. The boat drifted peacefully with the current, not lost, only traveling. Kenji instinctively took a step toward the water. The monk gently raised one hand. "Leave it, but someone will lose it." The old monk smiled. Or perhaps someone farther downstream has been waiting for it. They watched until the boat became smaller and smaller. Eventually, it disappeared around a bend in the river. Neither sadness nor relief filled the silence that followed, only acceptance. The monk rose to his feet. The river never keeps what is meant to continue. He picked up the empty baskets. Come, there is still much to learn. As they began walking back toward the temple, Kenji glanced one last time toward the place where the boat had vanished. Strangely, he no longer saw absence. He saw a journey continuing beyond the place where his eyes could follow. Sometimes, we believe a person's story ends on the day they die. Yet if we look carefully, the story often continues in quieter ways. A father's patience becomes his son's character. A mother's kindness becomes her daughter's compassion. A teacher's wisdom echoes in students he may never meet again. Like gentle ripples moving across still water, one sincere act can travel farther than the one who first created it. Perhaps this is why the Buddha encouraged people to pay attention to each intention. Not because every action is watched, but because every action shapes the world that follows. Tonight, as you listen to the soft rhythm of your own breathing, think of someone whose kindness still lives within you. Perhaps, without realizing it, you have already become part of their continuing journey. The morning sun had climbed above the mountain by the time they returned to the temple. As they entered the garden, Kenji noticed dozens of small clay lamps arranged before the meditation hall. Each lamp was dark. Each waited patiently for evening. The old monk smiled as though he had read the young traveler's thoughts. Tonight, you will help me light them. That evening, winter arrived gently upon the mountain. The last colors of sunset slowly disappeared behind distant peaks, leaving the sky painted in shades of deep blue and silver. A quiet stillness settled over the temple. The birds had returned to their nests. The wind had grown softer. Even the river below seemed to whisper more quietly than before. Kenji stood alone in the courtyard. For a long moment, he simply watched tiny snowflakes drifting through the light of the lantern hanging beneath the temple gate. Each flake appeared for only an instant, then melted into the earth. Nothing struggled to remain. Nothing feared its own ending. He wondered if his father had understood something he never had. Behind him, the wooden door slid open. The old monk stepped outside carrying a small wooden tray. Upon it rested dozens of tiny clay lamps. Beside them lay a single candle. Its flame burned quietly, no larger than the tip of a finger. Yet its warm light pushed gently against the surrounding darkness. The monk placed the tray upon the stone steps. "Tonight," he said softly, "we prepare the hall of quiet light." Kenji looked toward the meditation hall. Inside, rows of small lamps waited in perfect silence. Every one of them was empty. Every wick remained dark. The young traveler asked, "Will all of these be lit?" The monk smiled. "If one flame is willing to share itself, then every lamp can shine." Kenji picked up the first clay lamp. The monk handed him the candle. "Go on, carefully." Kenji lowered the flame toward the waiting wick. A tiny spark appeared. Then another flame rose gently. The first lamp now glowed beside the candle. Neither seemed brighter than the other. The monk nodded. Now the next. Kenji used the newly lit lamp to ignite another. Soon there were 3, then 5, then 10. The hall slowly filled with warm golden light. The paper walls reflected hundreds of gentle shadows dancing together outside. Snow continued falling. Inside, the darkness quietly retreated. After several minutes, the monk asked, "Tell me, which flame is the original one?" Kenji looked around. Every lamp burned with equal warmth. "I cannot tell." The monk smiled. "Neither can the light." The words lingered gently in the air. The old monk lifted the very first candle. Its flame remained exactly as it had been before. It has given its light to many others. And yet, it has lost nothing. Kenji watched the tiny flame dancing upon the wick. The monk continued. "When people hear the word giving, they often imagine becoming smaller. They fear losing what they possess. But look carefully. Has this candle become weaker?" Kenji shook his head. "No, it burns exactly the same." The monk nodded. "So it is with compassion. So it is with wisdom. So it is with love. They are not divided by sharing. They multiply." The temple became quiet once again. Only the faint crackling of dozens of tiny flames could be heard. The monk gently walked among them. "When your father taught you honesty, did he become less honest?" Kenji smiled faintly. "No. When he comforted someone who was suffering, did compassion leave his heart?" "No. When he loved you, did he have less love afterward?" Kenji looked down. His answer came almost as a whisper. "No." The monk stopped beside one of the lamps. Then, perhaps, what truly mattered in his life was never contained inside his body. The words entered Kenji's heart more deeply than he expected. He remembered his childhood, his father teaching him to repair broken sandals instead of throwing them away, his father bowing respectfully even to strangers, his father feeding birds each winter before eating breakfast himself. Small moments. Moments Kenji had almost forgotten, yet suddenly they felt alive again, not as memories, but as living parts of himself, without realizing it. He had been carrying his father all along, not upon his shoulders, but within the choices he made every day. The monk seemed to sense his thoughts. He knelt before one of the lamps, then gently placed a small clay bowl over its flame. Darkness returned to that single lamp. The rest of the hall remained bright. "What happened?" the monk asked. "One lamp has gone out," Kenji answered. The monk smiled. "Look again." The young traveler slowly lifted his eyes. The room was still glowing. One flame had disappeared, yet dozens remained. Their light touched every corner of the hall. The monk spoke softly. "Sometimes we mourn because one light is no longer visible, but we forget to notice all the light it has already awakened." Outside, the temple bell rang once. Its deep voice rolled gently across the valley before fading into silence. Kenji closed his eyes. For the first time since climbing the mountain, he no longer tried to imagine where his father had gone. Instead, he found himself asking a different question. What light had his father left behind? The answer came quietly. His patience, his honesty, his generosity, his calm voice, his gentle smile. None of those had vanished. They had simply found a new home inside the people who had known him. The monk looked toward the open doorway where snow continued to fall. Have you ever noticed how one candle can light 1,000 others and yet never asks to be remembered? Kenji nodded slowly. Yes, the old monk smiled. Perhaps that is why the wisest people rarely worry about how long they will be remembered. They concern themselves only with how much light they leave behind. The two of them remained seated in silence. The meditation hall glowed like a sky filled with quiet stars. Outside, winter embraced the mountain. Inside, warm light gently embraced the darkness. Neither tried to defeat the other. They simply existed together. At last, the old monk rose. He carefully extinguished each lamp with a small wooden snuffer, one by one. The flames disappeared. Yet strangely, the hall did not feel empty. It felt peaceful, as though the light still lingered in the quietness itself. Before leaving, the monk turned to Kenji. "Tomorrow, I will introduce you to someone." Kenji looked surprised. "There are other monks here?" The old monk chuckled softly. "No, a gardener. He has buried more trees than most people have planted." Kenji could not help but smile. "A gardener? Yes, he understands endings better than many philosophers." The old monk slid the paper door closed behind them. The last ember in the charcoal brazier glowed faintly before settling into darkness. Above the temple, the moon continued its silent journey across the winter sky, and somewhere beyond the sleeping forest, morning was already beginning its long walk toward the mountain. Perhaps we spend too much of our lives fearing that everything we love will one day disappear. Yet when we pause, when we become still enough to notice, we begin to see that love has never depended upon possession. Kindness does not become smaller because it is shared. Wisdom is not reduced because it is taught. Compassion is not exhausted because it is offered again and again, like one candle quietly lighting another. The goodness within one human life can continue long after that life has ended. Tonight, as your breathing becomes slower, think of one gentle lesson someone once gave you. Perhaps it was a smile, perhaps a comforting hand, perhaps a word spoken at exactly the right moment. That small light may still be guiding your path today, and without realizing it, you may already be passing that light to someone else. The mountain awoke beneath a sky of pale silver. The fresh snow rested quietly. Nothing moved. For a brief moment, the entire world seemed to be holding its breath. Kenji stepped into the temple courtyard. His footprints were the first to mark the untouched blanket of snow. The cold air filled his lungs with a sharp freshness he had almost forgotten existed. He looked toward the meditation hall. The clay lamps from the previous evening had already been carefully stored away. Only one remained, unlit, resting alone beside the wooden doorway. The old monk was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a faint tapping sound echoed from somewhere beyond the garden. Tap, pause, tap, pause. Curious. Kenji followed the sound. The narrow path curved around a grove of ancient bamboo before opening into a wide garden he had not noticed before. It was unlike any garden he had ever seen. Rows of young cherry trees stretched gently across the hillside. Some were no taller than a child. Others stood proudly with thick, weathered trunks. Near the center of the garden, an elderly man knelt beside a freshly dug hole. His robe was patched in many places. His hands were rough and stained with soil. Beside him lay a small cherry sapling. The man looked up and smiled. "You must be our guest." Kenji bowed politely. "I am." The gardener returned to his work without another word. He lowered the young tree carefully into the earth. His movements were slow, almost reverent, as though planting something far more precious than wood and leaves. Kenji watched quietly. After several minutes, he finally asked, "How old is that tree?" The gardener laughed softly. "It is 3 years old." Kenji looked around at the countless trees surrounding them. "And these? Some are 10 years. Some 50, some older than I am." He gently pressed soil around the roots. "And some," he smiled, "never lived beyond their first winter." The breeze carried a few loose snowflakes from the branches above. One landed softly upon the tiny sapling. The gardener brushed it away with great care. "You seem to love these trees." "I do. Does it not make you sad, knowing that they will all die one day?" The old man paused. He rested both hands upon the handle of his shovel. Then he looked across the garden. "I have buried more than 1,000 cherry trees." Kenji blinked. 1,000? Perhaps more. I stopped counting many years ago. The young traveler could not hide his surprise. If they always die, why keep planting them? The gardener smiled, instead of answering. He stood and began walking slowly through the orchard. Kenji followed. Together, they passed trees of every age. Tiny saplings reaching toward the winter sun, strong trees with broad trunks, old trees whose branches had long since stopped flowering. Finally, they stopped before a weathered tree. Its trunk was hollow, its bark cracked by decades of wind and rain. Only one small branch still carried life. Upon that branch, one single blossom had opened, white, delicate, perfect. The gardener looked at it with quiet affection. This tree was planted by my teacher. He gently touched the rough bark. He died 34 winters ago. Kenji gazed at the blossom. It still blooms. Only one flower. The gardener nodded. One is enough. Silence settled between them, at last. The old man spoke again. When I was young, I asked my teacher the same question you asked me today. Why plant trees that will die? My teacher laughed. The gardener smiled at the memory. He handed me a seed. Because, he said, one day someone will rest beneath its shade. Kenji looked around the orchard once more. Children he would never meet, travelers not yet born, birds that had not yet hatched. All of them would one day find shelter among these branches. The gardener continued walking. There is a mistake many people make. They believe the value of life is measured by its length. He stopped beside a fallen cherry tree covered with fresh snow. I have seen trees live for 200 years and never become beautiful. I have also seen blossoms that lasted only 7 days. Yet people traveled across mountains just to witness them. He knelt beside the fallen trunk, running his weathered hand gently across its bark. This tree is dead, he smiled. So today, it will become warmth. Kenji looked confused. The gardener pointed toward the temple. The monks will use its wood to heat the meditation hall. In spring, its ashes will feed the soil, and from that soil, new blossoms will grow. He looked toward the small sapling they had planted earlier. So tell me, has this tree truly ended? Kenji remained silent. The question no longer seemed simple. The gardener's eyes sparkled with quiet kindness. In this garden, we do not fear endings. We simply prepare for beginnings. A gentle breeze passed through the orchard. The lone blossom trembled slightly. Then, without resistance, it released itself from the branch. The tiny flower floated through the cold air, turning slowly, gracefully, until it came to rest upon the snow. Kenji instinctively stepped forward. He bent down and carefully lifted the blossom into his palm. It lasted such a short time. The gardener looked at him. Would it have been more beautiful if it had remained forever? Kenji stared at the delicate petals. He thought of his father's smile, of the empty boat, of the candlelight filling the meditation hall. Slowly, he shook his head. No. The gardener smiled. Exactly. Impermanence does not steal beauty. It creates it. The words echoed softly within Kenji's heart. Perhaps the reason each blossom was precious was because no blossom stayed. Perhaps the reason each sunrise mattered was because every sunset arrived. Perhaps the reason every embrace carried meaning was because one day someone would let go. The gardener gently took the blossom from Kenji's hand. He placed it beside the roots of the young sapling. Everything returns. Everything nourishes something else. No life is wasted. Far above the orchard, the temple bell rang once. Its deep voice drifted across the valley. The gardener smiled. Our tea will be getting cold. As they walked back toward the temple, Kenji looked behind him one last time. The old cherry tree still stood proudly against the winter sky. One blossom had fallen. Yet the tree did not seem empty. It seemed fulfilled. And for the first time since beginning his journey, Kenji wondered if perhaps the purpose of life had never been to avoid its ending. Perhaps its purpose was simply to bloom. There is something quietly miraculous about a cherry blossom. It never struggles against the wind. It never asks for one more season. It opens completely, knowing that its beauty will not last. Perhaps we humans suffer because we ask life to promise what nature never has. We ask for certainty. When every river keeps flowing, we ask for permanence. When every season keeps changing, we ask never to lose those we love, while forgetting that love itself becomes meaningful because it is precious and fleeting. Tonight, as your breathing grows slower, imagine yourself walking through that silent orchard, snow beneath your feet, the fragrance of cedar in the air, a single blossom resting gently upon your open hand. Notice how beautiful it is, not despite its brief life, but because of it. And perhaps, if one blossom can accept the wind without fear, we, too, may one day learn to welcome each moment exactly as it comes. The fifth night upon the mountain arrived without warning. Clouds covered the moon. The stars disappeared behind a blanket of drifting mist. For the first time since reaching the temple, the darkness felt complete. Even the familiar stream seemed quieter than usual. Its gentle voice faded beneath the hush of the sleeping forest. Kenji lay awake, not because he was uncomfortable, nor because grief had returned with the same sharpness as before. Something else stirred within him, a question, not as heavy as it had once been, yet not entirely at peace. The old monk had spoken of rivers, of candles, of cherry blossoms. Each lesson had softened something inside him. Still, when he imagined his father's final breath, his chest tightened. He closed his eyes. The silence grew deeper. Then, from somewhere across the temple grounds, a bell rang. One slow note, deep, gentle. Its sound rolled through the mountain like a wave moving across a still lake. Kenji opened his eyes. He waited. Nothing. Several moments passed. Then the bell rang again. Once. Only once. The sound lingered in the air long after the metal had become still, unable to ignore it. He wrapped his robe around his shoulders and stepped quietly into the cold night. Snow crunched softly beneath his feet. The courtyard was empty. No lanterns burned. No voices echoed through the halls. Only the faint outline of the temple roofs stood beneath the drifting mist. The bell rang again, this time closer. Kenji followed the sound, past the meditation hall, across the wooden bridge, through the bamboo grove, until he reached the bell tower. The great bronze bell hung motionless. Its wooden striker rested against its frame. No one was there. The bell should have been silent, yet somehow he was certain he had heard it. A quiet voice came from behind him. "You are listening very carefully." Kenji turned. The old monk stood beneath a cedar tree, holding a small lantern. Its warm glow illuminated only a few steps of the snowy path. Nothing more. Kenji bowed. "Master, I heard the bell." "So did I. But no one struck it." The monk smiled. "Are you certain?" Kenji looked toward the enormous bell. "It isn't moving." The old monk walked slowly toward the tower. His lantern swayed gently with each step. When he reached the bell, he placed one hand upon its cold bronze surface. "It has not been struck tonight." Kenji frowned. "Then how?" The monk interrupted gently. "When your father died. How many times have you heard that moment again?" The question settled heavily between them. Kenji lowered his eyes. Every day, every night, I hear his final breath. I see his face. I remember every detail. The monk nodded. And does the moment happen again? No, yet your mind rings the bell. The wind passed softly through the trees. Somewhere high above them, snow slipped quietly from a branch. The monk continued. There is an old saying, a bell rings only once. The mind rings it 1,000 times. Kenji remained silent. The old monk led him inside the bell tower. The wooden floor creaked gently beneath their feet. Moonlight filtered through narrow openings in the walls. The great bell stood before them like an ancient guardian. The monk sat cross-legged. He gestured for Kenji to do the same. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Finally, the monk asked, "What sound do you hear now?" Kenji listened carefully. The wind. What else? The stream. What else? A branch moving. What else? Silence. The monk smiled. Notice something. The sounds come, and then they leave. They do not stay. Kenji nodded. Now listen to your thoughts. The young traveler hesitated. He closed his eyes. Almost immediately, his father's face appeared. The small room, the dying fire, the final breath, his own trembling hands, his mother's tears. The monk's calm voice interrupted gently. Did you invite those thoughts? No, they arrived. And will they remain forever? Kenji took another slow breath. Already, the images had begun fading, replacing themselves with the sound of wind moving through cedar branches. No, they changed. The monk smiled. Thoughts behave like clouds. They visit, they drift, they disappear. We suffer when we build houses beneath passing clouds. The words entered Kenji's heart more quietly than any lesson before. For years, he had believed every frightening thought deserved an answer. Every painful memory demanded another question. Every fear required another explanation. Perhaps not every thought was telling the truth. The monk stood. He walked toward the great bell. Without striking it, he rested his palm upon its weathered bronze. This bell has witnessed many funerals. It has welcomed newborn children. It has celebrated weddings. It has called monks to meditation. It has stood through storms and earthquakes and winters harsher than this one. He looked toward Kenji. The bell does not choose which moments to keep. It simply receives each one, and then it becomes quiet again. Outside, the mist slowly parted. The moon emerged between drifting clouds. Its pale light poured across the snow-covered courtyard. The monk stepped outside. Kenji followed. Together they looked toward the sleeping valley below. Tiny lights glowed from distant homes. Families resting, children dreaming, old people breathing quietly beside fading fires. Life continuing, just as it always had. "Master," Kenji whispered. "I still fear death." The old monk nodded. "I know. I fear losing everyone. So do many people. I fear my own last breath." The monk looked toward the moon. "Then do not spend tonight trying to stop death." He smiled gently. "Spend tonight noticing life." Kenji looked confused. The monk pointed toward the valley. "Listen." At first, Kenji heard nothing unusual. Then slowly, one sound after another revealed itself. The distant river, an owl calling from the forest, the whisper of pine branches, snow settling upon rooftops, the quiet rhythm of his own breathing. Everything alive, everything changing, everything enough. The monk spoke one final time before turning back toward the temple. "When the mind is afraid, it imagines tomorrow. When the heart is peaceful, it returns to this breath. Without another word, he disappeared into the soft darkness. Kenji remained beside the bell tower, listening, not for another bell, not for another answer, only for the gentle sound of one breath, becoming the next. How many times have we suffered, not because something happened, but because our minds continued telling the story long after the moment had passed? A single painful memory, repeated 100 times, a single fear, imagined in 1,000 different ways, like a bell that was struck only once. Its echo continues because we refuse to let the valley become quiet again. The Buddha often encouraged his students to observe the mind with kindness rather than fear. Not every thought deserves to be believed. Not every fear deserves to become tomorrow. Tonight, as you rest, notice the sounds around you, the quiet hum of your room, the rhythm of your breathing, perhaps even the silence itself, like the mountain. You do not need to chase every echo. You only need to remember that every echo eventually returns to stillness. As Kenji walked back toward his room, he noticed a faint light glowing from the kitchen. Inside, the old monk was already heating water before dawn. On the table rested 2 empty tea bowls. Beside them, a small woven basket filled with smooth river stones. Tomorrow, the monk said with a gentle smile, we will learn why people spend their lives carrying stones that were never theirs to begin with. The morning arrived, wrapped in a silver mist. The mountains seemed farther away than usual. Even the tallest pines disappeared into the pale veil drifting across the valley. The temple had not yet awakened. No footsteps echoed through the courtyard. No doors slid open. Only the gentle crackling of charcoal could be heard from the kitchen. Kenji entered quietly. The old monk was already waiting. A kettle rested above glowing embers. Steam rose in slow spirals toward the wooden ceiling. Beside 2 simple tea bowls sat a woven basket. Inside were smooth river stones. Some were no larger than a walnut. Others filled the palm of a hand. The monk poured tea without speaking. Only after both cups were filled did he look toward Kenji. Choose one. Kenji reached into the basket. His fingers paused over several stones before selecting one that was round and pleasantly warm from the room. The monk nodded. Keep it with you. Kenji looked puzzled. For meditation? For today. Nothing more was explained. After sunrise, the 2 men left the temple. Instead of walking toward the river they had visited before, the monk led Kenji higher into the mountains. The trail wound through forests of cedar and maple. Birdsong drifted from invisible branches overhead. The scent of damp moss filled the cool morning air for nearly an hour. Neither of them spoke. Kenji held the stone inside his sleeve. It was light, almost weightless. Eventually, the monk asked, "Is the stone heavy?" Kenji smiled. "Not at all." The monk nodded. "Good." They continued walking. By mid-morning, they reached a small clearing overlooking the valley below. The monk sat upon an old fallen log. Kenji joined him. The clouds had begun to lift. Far below, tiny villages rested beside winding rivers. Smoke curled gently from morning fires. The monk asked again, "How does the stone feel now?" Kenji turned it in his hand. "A little heavier." The monk smiled. "Has the stone changed?" "No." "What has changed?" Kenji thought for a moment. "I've been carrying it longer." The monk nodded quietly. Then they resumed their journey. The path became steeper. Roots twisted across the ground like sleeping serpents. Several times Kenji stumbled. Each time, his hand instinctively protected the stone from falling. By early afternoon, his shoulders had begun to ache. His breathing grew deeper. The little stone no longer felt insignificant. It seemed strangely dense, as though it had absorbed the weight of the entire mountain. Finally, unable to hide his discomfort, Kenji laughed softly. I never imagined such a small stone could become so heavy. The monk stopped walking. He turned slowly. Then perhaps it is time to ask another question. He looked toward the stone. Why are you still carrying it? Kenji blinked. You asked me to. The monk nodded, and if I had forgotten, the young traveler hesitated. I suppose I would still be carrying it. The monk smiled gently. Exactly. They continued until they reached a narrow stream crossing the trail. The monk knelt beside the flowing water, without looking up. He began telling a story. Many years ago, a wealthy merchant came to this mountain. He owned more land than anyone in his province. He wore silk robes. His horses were the finest. His storehouses overflowed with grain, but he could not sleep. Kenji listened carefully. The merchant believed someone had cheated him many years before. He replayed the memory every day. He imagined arguments that never happened. He rehearsed words he wished he had spoken. He carried his anger like a treasured possession. The monk picked up a stone from the stream. He asked an old teacher, "How do I find peace?" The teacher handed him a stone. "Carry this until sunset," he said. The merchant obeyed. By evening, his arm trembled with exhaustion. He returned, frustrated. "Why did you make me carry this all day?" The teacher smiled. "I did not make you. I only asked once." The monk looked toward Kenji. The merchant realized the stone had become painful, not because of its weight, but because he refused to set it down. The stream flowed gently between them. Its clear water danced over smooth pebbles. The monk continued. Regret is often like that. So is resentment. So is guilt. We believe we must continue carrying them, simply because they have been with us for a long time. For a long while, neither man spoke. Finally, Kenji's voice broke the silence. There is something I have never told anyone. The monk waited patiently. When my father became ill, there was one evening. He asked me to stay with him, but I told him I was too busy. I promised I would return after finishing my work. Kenji lowered his eyes. I never did. His voice trembled. He died 2 days later. The mountain seemed impossibly still. Even the birds had fallen silent. I have carried that moment every day since. The old monk looked at him with quiet compassion. Then tell me, he pointed toward the stone in Kenji's hand. Which is heavier, the stone or that memory? Tears gathered in Kenji's eyes. The memory. The monk nodded. And yet, you have been carrying both. The monk stepped into the shallow stream. Water flowed gently around his sandals. He extended his hand. Give me the stone. Kenji placed it into the monk's palm. The old monk held it for a moment. Then, without ceremony, he released it into the water. A small splash, a few ripples. Then, silence. The stone disappeared beneath the clear current. The monk looked downstream. Does the river mourn the stone? No. Does the stone resist the river? No. They simply continue together. He turned toward Kenji. There are moments in life when remembering is an act of love, but there are also moments when continuing to suffer becomes another form of attachment. Kenji stood quietly beside the stream. The cold water reflected the afternoon sky. For the first time, he considered a possibility he had never allowed himself to imagine. Perhaps his father had forgiven him long before he had refused to forgive himself. The thought frightened him, because if it were true, then the burden he had carried for so long had never been placed there by his father, only by himself. The journey back to the temple felt strangely lighter. Nothing in the forest had changed. The same trees, the same birds, the same winding path, yet every step seemed easier, not because Kenji's grief had disappeared, but because he had begun to understand. That grief and guilt were not the same thing. One honored love, the other imprisoned it. As the temple roof appeared through the trees, the old monk smiled. "Tomorrow, we will visit someone who has been waiting for you." Kenji looked surprised. "Who?" The monk laughed softly. "An old woman. She has forgotten nearly everything, except how to live. Sometimes, the burdens we carry are invisible. No one sees them resting upon our shoulders. No one hears the conversations we continue repeating inside our minds. A single regret, held for years, can become heavier than any mountain stone. Yet the weight was never created by the memory itself. It was created by our unwillingness to release it. Forgiveness does not erase the past. It simply loosens the hand that has been clinging to it. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, imagine placing every worry, every regret, every unfinished conversation into the gentle current of a quiet mountain stream. Watch the water carry them, not because they never mattered, but because you no longer need to carry them alone. Listen carefully. Can you hear the river? It has never stopped flowing, neither has life, and, perhaps, neither has compassion. The followy, the heavy snow had stopped. Sunlight rested gently upon the temple roofs, turning for a while, the mountain sea brighter, almost J. Kenji found or a basket, tea. Inside, there appeared to be fresh rice cakes and a tiny clay jar. "Are we traveling again?" Kenji asked. The monk smiled. "Only as far as the next valley." He adjusted the bundle over one shoulder. "We are going to visit an old friend." The trail descended gently through cedar forests. Morning birds fluttered from branch to branch, their songs echoing softly through the crisp air. The farther they walked, the quieter the world became. Nearly an hour later, a tiny cottage appeared among the trees. Its roof was covered with moss. Smoke curled lazily from a crooked chimney. Beside the house stood a weathered plum tree. Its branches were bare now, yet dozens of tiny birds rested there without fear. An old woman sat upon a wooden bench. She was carefully peeling an apple, or at least, trying to. Several pieces of peel lay scattered across her lap. The knife paused often, as though she had forgotten what she was doing. When she noticed the monk, her face brightened with the innocent delight of a child. "Oh, you've come." The monk bowed deeply. "As I promised." She looked toward Kenji. For several long seconds, she simply stared. Then she smiled. "And who might you be?" "My name is Kenji." She nodded politely. "It is nice to meet you." Only moments later, she asked again, "And who are you?" Kenji blinked. The monk answered quietly, "Her memory has become like autumn leaves. Some remain. Many have already drifted away." Inside the cottage, everything was simple. A low wooden table, a small fireplace, shelves lined with handmade bowls. The scent of roasted barley tea filled the room. The old woman carefully placed 3 cups upon the table. Then she stopped, looking confused. "Was someone coming today?" The monk smiled gently. "Yes." "Oh," she laughed. "I almost forgot." Kenji noticed something remarkable. Each time she forgot, she never seemed embarrassed. She simply smiled, accepted it, and continued living. As they shared tea, she asked the same questions again and again. "Where are you from? Have we met before? What season is it?" Sometimes, only minutes apart. Kenji answered each one patiently. The monk never corrected her, never sighed, never reminded her that she had already asked. He answered every question, as though hearing it for the first time. Suddenly, a tiny sparrow landed upon the windowsill. The old woman's face lit up. "Oh, my little friend." She slowly reached for a handful of rice, scattering it outside. The bird hopped closer without hesitation. Then another arrived. Soon, half a dozen tiny sparrows were eating together. Kenji smiled. "They trust you." The old woman laughed softly. "I don't remember when they first came, but they remember." The words lingered in the quiet room. "I no longer remember their first visit, but every morning they still come." She watched the birds with gentle affection. "I suppose kindness has a better memory than I do." The monk looked toward Kenji, but said nothing. He didn't need to. After lunch, the old woman disappeared into another room. She returned carrying a small wooden box. Its corners had been worn smooth with age. She opened it carefully. Inside were dozens of tiny objects. A child's marble, a faded ribbon, an old fishing hook, a dried maple leaf, several smooth stones. She picked up each treasure slowly, holding it close to her eyes. "I don't know why I kept these." She smiled, apologetically. "I can't remember." Then, she lifted a tiny wooden whistle. The moment her fingers touched it, tears quietly filled her eyes. "I don't know whose this was," she whispered, "but it makes my heart warm." The monk accepted the whistle, turning it gently in his hands. "It belonged to your son." The old woman looked surprised. "I had a son?" The room fell silent. The monk nodded. "You did. He was a kind man. He often climbed to the temple, carrying vegetables from your garden." The old woman's eyes searched the monk's face. "As strange as it sounds, I cannot remember his face." A tear slipped slowly down her cheek. "But," she pressed one hand over her heart, "I remember loving someone very much." Kenji felt something tighten inside his chest. He had feared forgetting his father. He had feared the day when memories would fade. Yet here sat a woman who could no longer remember names, or seasons, or even her own child. Still, love remained, invisible, wordless, untouched. The monk poured more tea, then spoke quietly. "There is an old saying, the mind is like morning mist. The heart is like the mountain. The mist changes. The mountain remains." The old woman smiled at the warmth of the tea. She no longer seemed sad. A few moments later, she looked toward Kenji once more. "And who are you?" This time, Kenji smiled warmly. "My name is Kenji. It is very nice to meet you." She laughed. "It is very nice to meet you too," as though they truly had met for the first time. The afternoon sun hung low above the western hills as the monk and Kenji began their journey back for a long while. Neither of them spoke. The forest seemed to understand. At last, Kenji broke the silence. "Master, if memories disappear, what remains of a person?" The monk paused beside a cedar tree. He looked up into its ancient branches. "When winter comes, the tree loses every leaf. It may appear empty, but beneath the bark, life is still quietly waiting." He turned toward Kenji. "The mind remembers names. The heart remembers love. And sometimes, love lasts much longer." Kenji looked back toward the distant cottage. He thought about the sparrows. They still visited every morning, not because the old woman remembered feeding them, but because she had done so with such consistency. That kindness itself had become part of the world. Perhaps the deepest parts of a human life were never stored only in memory. Perhaps they were written into every heart they had ever touched. As the first evening stars appeared above the mountain, The temple bell sounded once, not to call anyone, not to announce anything, simply to greet another day that had quietly become yesterday. There may come a day when we forget many things. A familiar name, a favorite song, the face of a distant neighbor. Even the path we have walked for years. Yet kindness has a remarkable way of remaining. A gentle habit, repeated over a lifetime, can become stronger than memory itself. The Buddha often reminded his students that the heart is shaped not by what it knows, but by what it practices. Compassion, patience, generosity, again and again, until they become as natural as breathing. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, think not only about what you hope to remember, but about what you hope to become, because memories may fade like footprints after fresh snow, but a loving heart can continue warming the world, long after words have been forgotten. That evening, a gentle rain began to fall, not the heavy rain of summer storms, but the quiet, patient rain that seemed to wash the mountain without ever disturbing its peace. Each drop tapped softly against the temple roof. The sound blended with the distant stream until it became impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Kenji entered the meditation hall. A single oil lamp burned beside the old monk. Between them rested an ancient wooden board marked with black lines. Upon it, dozens of black and white stones lay scattered. The game had already begun, yet there was no second player. The monk picked up a white stone. He turned it slowly between his fingers. Without looking up, he asked, "Have you ever played Go?" Kenji shook his head. "My father knew the game. I never learned." The monk smiled. "That is often how wisdom is. We intend to learn it someday, until one day there is no longer someone left to teach us." The words lingered quietly. The monk placed the white stone onto the board. Its soft click echoed through the silent hall. Then he looked toward Kenji. There was once a king who believed he could defeat time. Long ago, beyond mountains no traveler could now name, there stood a kingdom unlike any other. Its gardens bloomed throughout the year. Its rivers never ran dry. Its markets overflowed with silk, spices, and gold. People spoke proudly of their ruler, King Haruto. He was wise, generous, strong in battle. His people admired him deeply. Yet, there was one enemy he could never conquer. Each morning, when his attendants placed a polished bronze mirror before him, he searched for signs of age. One silver hair, one wrinkle beside the eyes, one small reminder that even kings belong to time. At first, he laughed. They are only small changes. But each passing year, the mirror seemed less forgiving. His smile faded. He summoned physicians from distant lands. They offered rare herbs. Nothing changed. He invited alchemists. They promised miraculous elixirs. Nothing changed. He called astrologers. They studied the heavens. Still, his hair continued turning silver. One autumn evening, an old traveler arrived at the palace gates. He carried no sword, no riches, only a walking staff polished smooth by many years upon lonely roads. The guards wished to send him away, but the old man smiled. "I have heard that your king wishes to conquer time." The message quickly reached the palace. Curious, the king ordered the traveler to be brought before him. The throne room glittered with gold. Silk banners hung from towering cedar pillars. Servants stood silently along polished stone walls. The traveler bowed. Nothing more. The king studied him. "You claim to know how time may be defeated." The traveler nodded. I know where time cannot be found." The entire court fell silent. The king leaned forward. "Speak." The traveler smiled gently. "Tomorrow morning, come with me. No guards, no horses, no crown. If you truly seek your answer." The ministers protested immediately. "It is dangerous. It may be a trap." The king raised one hand. For reasons he could not explain, he trusted the old traveler. Before dawn, the two men climbed into the mountains. Hours passed. Neither spoke. At last, they reached a perfectly still lake hidden among ancient pines. Mist floated gently above the water. The traveler sat upon a smooth stone. "So," the king asked impatiently, "where is this place where time cannot be found?" The traveler pointed toward the lake. "What do you see?" "My reflection." "And what else?" "The mountains, the sky, the trees." The traveler nodded. "Good." Then he picked up a tiny pebble. Without warning, he dropped it into the lake. Ripples spread quietly across the surface. The reflection disappeared. The king frowned. "It is gone." The traveler smiled. "Wait." Neither man moved. Slowly, the ripples faded. The water became still once more. The mountains returned. The sky returned. The king's reflection returned. The traveler asked, "Where did they go?" The king hesitated. "They never left. They only seemed to disappear." The traveler nodded. "So it is with youth. So it is with beauty. So it is with strength." The king frowned. "I do not understand." The traveler looked toward the morning sun rising above the eastern ridge. "You believe youth is something you possess, so you fear losing it. But youth was never yours. It was simply a season, just as spring never belongs to the cherry tree. It merely visits." The king lowered his eyes. The words unsettled him. The traveler reached into his robe. From within, he removed an old wooden crown. Its edges were chipped. Its paint had almost vanished. "It belonged to a king I once knew," the traveler said. "He believed it would make him immortal." The king accepted it carefully. It felt surprisingly light. "What happened to him?" "He died." "And the crown?" The traveler smiled. It waited for another king. Silence settled over the lake. The king stared at the weathered wood. The traveler continued. "Power travels, wealth travels, titles travel, even kingdoms travel. Nothing remains with one person forever." He looked directly into the king's eyes. "So, tell me, if everything you own must one day belong to another, what is truly yours?" For the first time in many years, the king found himself without an answer. The old monk placed another white stone upon the go board. Click. The tiny sound seemed louder than the rain outside. Kenji remained silent. He could almost picture the lonely king standing beside the mountain lake. What became of him? The monk smiled. He returned to his kingdom. Did he stop growing old? No. Did he stop fearing death? The monk looked thoughtfully at the board. Not immediately, but each morning he spent less time looking into mirrors and more time looking into the faces of his people. The rain softened. The monk gently gathered the black and white stones into a small wooden bowl. One day, the king realized something. He had spent half his life trying to preserve the spring, instead of planting seeds for those who would one day inherit the summer. The old monk extinguished the oil lamp. Darkness filled the meditation hall. Only the sound of rain remained. Kenji sat quietly. He thought of his father, not as an old man, not as a dying man, but as a man who had planted countless invisible seeds, long before he ever knew they would bloom in someone else. Outside, the rain washed the stone paths clean. Tomorrow's footprints had not yet been made. There is a quiet sorrow that visits every human heart. It whispers that if only we could hold on a little longer, remain a little younger, keep one more precious moment from slipping away. Then perhaps we would finally feel safe. Yet every season teaches the same gentle lesson. Spring never argues with summer. Autumn never resists winter. And winter quietly prepares the earth for another beginning. The Buddha invited us not to fight the changing seasons of life, but to walk through them with open eyes and an open heart. Tonight, as you breathe slowly, imagine placing every fear of growing older, every fear of losing what cannot remain, beside that still mountain lake. Watch the ripples settle. Notice that beneath every changing reflection, the water itself remains calm. Perhaps peace has never come from stopping time. Perhaps it comes from learning to flow with it. The rain had washed the mountain clean. When dawn arrived, every leaf shimmered beneath tiny drops of crystal water. The sky stretched endlessly above the valley. For the first time in many days, not a single cloud remained. Kenji stood outside the temple. The morning air felt different, lighter. He could not explain why. Perhaps something inside him had begun to loosen behind him. The old monk quietly tied a straw hat beneath his chin. Instead of carrying tea or a basket, he carried only a walking staff. Its smooth wooden surface had been polished by decades of use. "Today," he said, "we will walk farther than before." Kenji nodded. Neither of them hurried. Some journeys asked for silence before answers. The trail descended through forests, where towering cedars slowly gave way to maple and chestnut trees. As the sun climbed higher, the sound of rushing water grew louder. Not the gentle stream beside the temple. This river was powerful, wide, restless. Its current twisted around enormous boulders before disappearing into a narrow gorge. The monk stopped. He rested both hands upon his staff. "Many years ago," he said quietly. This river overflowed. Kenji looked toward the valley. It destroyed an entire village. Nothing remained except a few scattered stone foundations. Nature had slowly reclaimed everything else. Young trees now grew where homes had once stood. Wildflowers covered forgotten pathways. Birds nested in broken walls. It was difficult to imagine that people had once laughed here. Children had once played here. Families had once shared evening meals here. The monk continued walking. "There is someone I want you to meet." Near the riverbank, a rhythmic sound echoed through the valley. Tap, tap, tap. Someone was working. As they rounded a bend, Kenji saw an elderly man shaping a wooden plank with careful hands. Half-finished boats rested beneath a simple shelter made from cedar logs. The craftsman looked up. His face was deeply lined by both age and sunlight. Yet his eyes were clear, peaceful. When he noticed the monk, he smiled warmly. "My old friend," the monk bowed, "and my oldest teacher." The two men embraced briefly, not with excitement, but with the quiet affection of people who no longer needed many words. The craftsman turned toward Kenji. "So, this is the young traveler." The monk nodded. "He still carries many questions." The old boat builder chuckled softly. "Then he has come to the right river." They sat together beside the water. The craftsman poured warm barley tea into 3 wooden cups for a long time. No one spoke. Only the river filled the silence. Finally, the old man rested his gaze upon the current. "I once hated this river." Kenji looked surprised. "You?" The craftsman nodded. "It took everything." His voice remained calm, as though speaking about someone else's life. 42 years ago, the spring snow melted too quickly. The rain did not stop. The river rose higher than anyone had ever seen. He paused. "My wife my little daughter, my home. Everything disappeared before sunrise. Kenji lowered his eyes. I searched for days. I found nothing. The old man gently traced circles upon the surface of his tea. When people came to comfort me, they said many kind things. Time will heal you. They are in a better place. Be strong. He smiled sadly. I could hear their words, but I could not receive them. The river continued flowing, unchanged, unconcerned. I stopped eating. The craftsman continued. I stopped speaking. I stopped noticing the seasons. I was still breathing, but inside, I had already died. The monk listened quietly. He had clearly heard this story before, yet he never interrupted. The old man looked toward Kenji. Have you ever seen someone walking whose heart had already given up? Kenji thought carefully. Then, very softly, I think I have. The craftsman smiled. I saw him every morning in my mirror. Silence returned. The wind stirred dry reeds along the riverbank. Several white cranes lifted gracefully into the sky. One autumn afternoon, the craftsman said, an old monk found me sitting beside this river. Kenji glanced toward the monk beside him. The boat builder laughed. No, not him. His teacher. The old monk smiled quietly. My master rarely traveled, but when he did, someone's life usually changed. The craftsman nodded. I expected him to explain suffering. I expected him to tell me why such things happen. Instead, he handed me a broken paddle. Kenji frowned. A paddle? Yes. The old man smiled. It was cracked from one end to the other. Can you repair this? The monk asked. I became angry. Repair it? My family is gone. My life is over. Why would I care about a broken paddle? The old craftsman's eyes softened. The monk looked at me for a long time. Then he said something I have never forgotten. If you no longer wish to cross the river, why are you still sitting beside it? The old man looked toward the unfinished boats resting beneath the shelter. The words made me furious. For weeks, I hated him. But eventually, I picked up the paddle. I repaired it. Then another, and another. Soon, people began bringing me damaged boats. I fixed them. Fishermen crossed the river again. Children reached school. Families visited one another. His voice became almost a whisper. I never replaced the family I lost. No one can. But one day, I realized something. I had spent years asking, why was everything taken from me? When a better question had been waiting all along. He looked directly at Kenji. Now that I am still here, how shall I live? Kenji felt those words settle deep inside him. They did not erase grief. They did not explain tragedy. But somehow, they opened a door. Before they left, the craftsman led Kenji to a small wooden boat, unlike the others. It had no painted markings, no owner's name, no decoration, only smooth cedar wood. This one, the craftsman said, I never sell. Kenji ran his fingers gently across its side. Why? The old man smiled. Because it reminds me of what? That every life is only borrowed for a little while. He looked toward the river. One day, someone else will continue the journey. As the sun drifted lower in the sky, Kenji and the monk began walking back toward the temple. Halfway up the mountain, Kenji finally spoke. Master, do you think suffering ever truly ends? The monk considered the question for a long time. Then he answered, suffering changes. So do we. Sometimes. The end of suffering is not that life becomes easier. It is that the heart becomes wider. They continued climbing in silence. Below them, the river kept flowing. Not toward the past, not toward regret, always toward the sea. There are moments in life that divide everything into two parts. the life before and the life after. No wisdom can erase those moments. No story can undo them. Yet even after the darkest flood, the river continues to flow. The trees bloom again. Birds return in spring, not because they have forgotten winter, but because life quietly continues its endless invitation to begin again, tonight. As you listen to the rhythm of your own breathing, perhaps there is something within you that has long believed it could never heal. Do not force it. Do not hurry it. Simply sit beside it, as patiently as the old boat builder sat beside the river. Sometimes, healing does not arrive as a miracle. Sometimes, it begins the moment we stop asking, "Why did this happen?" and gently begin asking, "How shall I live now?" The sun was already slipping behind the western mountains. Its final light rested gently upon the temple roofs before fading into the quiet embrace of evening. The valley below glowed with soft shades of amber and blue. Smoke rose from distant homes. Birds returned to their nests. Another day had quietly completed its journey. Kenji expected they would return to the meditation hall. Instead, the old monk turned toward a narrow path behind the temple. It was a path Kenji had never noticed before, overgrown with moss, lined with ancient stone lanterns that had long ago surrendered to vines and time. Without speaking, the monk began walking. Kenji followed. Their footsteps were the only sound beneath the tall cedar trees. The forest seemed older here, the air cooler. Even the wind moved more slowly. After several minutes, the path opened into a small clearing. There, hidden among wild grasses and weathered pines, lay an old cemetery. It was unlike the village cemeteries Kenji had known. No grand monuments, no elaborate carvings, only simple stones, some leaning gently with age, some almost completely covered by moss, others so worn that even their inscriptions had disappeared. The monk stopped before a small stone marker. Unlike the others, it carried no name, no dates, no prayer, nothing. Only a smooth piece of grey stone standing quietly beneath an old maple tree. The last crimson leaves drifted lazily to the earth. The monk looked at it for a long time before speaking. "This," he said softly, "is the most important grave in this temple." Kenji looked around. "But there is no name." The monk smiled. "Exactly." For several minutes, neither of them moved. The forest itself seemed to be listening. At last, Kenji asked, "Who is buried here?" The monk bent down. With one gentle movement, he brushed away a layer of fallen leaves from the base of the stone. "No one." Kenji blinked. "No one?" The monk nodded. "The earth beneath us holds many ashes, but this stone belongs to no single person." He rested his hand lightly upon its weathered surface. "It reminds us that one day, every name becomes silent." A cool breeze stirred the branches overhead. More leaves drifted downward, landing softly around the stone. The monk continued, "When I was very young, I thought leaving my name behind was the purpose of life. I wanted people to remember me. I wanted to become someone important." He smiled at his younger self. "I believed memory was another form of immortality." Kenji listened carefully. It was the first time the old monk had spoken about himself. "There was a time," the monk said quietly, "when I did not wear these robes. I was the son of a merchant. Our family traded silk between distant provinces. Wealth surrounded us. My father believed prosperity could protect us from suffering." The monk looked toward the valley beyond the trees. "So did I." He paused, until one winter, his voice became softer. "A sickness passed through our town. It did not care who was rich. It did not care who was poor. It visited every door. The forest fell completely silent. My younger sister became ill, then my mother, my father. Within a few weeks, the house that had once been filled with laughter had become unbearably quiet. Kenji lowered his gaze. The monk's expression never changed. He spoke as calmly as someone describing the changing seasons. I buried them all before spring. I could not remain. The monk continued. Every street reminded me of someone. Every meal tasted of absence. So I left. He smiled faintly. I believed distance would make grief smaller. I didn't. Did it? Kenji asked. The monk shook his head. No, I crossed mountains. I crossed rivers. I crossed entire provinces. But every morning, my sorrow woke before I did. Kenji thought of his own journey to the temple. Perhaps he had done exactly the same thing. One evening, the monk continued, I became lost during a snowstorm. I found a small hut deep within the mountains. An old hermit lived there. He welcomed me without asking my name. He offered warm soup, a dry blanket, and silence. The monk smiled. For 3 days, he asked me nothing. Not where I came from, not why I was there, nothing. On the 4th morning, he pointed toward the valley. What do you see? I answered. Snow, trees, mountains. The hermit nodded. Good. Now tell me, where is your grief? I pointed here. The monk touched his chest. Then why have you been searching for it everywhere else? Kenji felt a quiet shiver. The monk reached into his sleeve. From within, he removed a tiny wooden plaque. Its surface was smooth with age. Upon it, one name had been carefully carved. He placed it gently before the nameless stone. This, he said, was once my name. Kenji looked surprised. You no longer use it? The monk smiled. When I entered the monastery, my teacher asked me to place my name here. Why? I asked. He answered, because if you spend your whole life protecting your name, you may never discover who you truly are. The old monk looked toward the fading sky. I have never taken it back. Darkness slowly settled over the cemetery. The first evening star appeared above the trees. Kenji stared at the nameless stone. So, he whispered, one day, even our names disappear. The monk nodded. Most of them. Kenji felt an unexpected sadness. Isn't that frightening? The old monk smiled with extraordinary gentleness. It once was, but then I realized. He pointed toward the temple below. Do you know the names of the monks who planted those cedars 200 years ago? No, yet every summer they still offer shade. He pointed toward the stone bridge. Do you know the carpenter who built it? Kenji shook his head. No, but each traveler still crosses safely. The monk's eyes reflected the fading light. The world has always been carried forward by countless hands whose names have already been forgotten. He paused. And yet, their kindness remains. A single maple leaf drifted onto the nameless stone. Neither man moved to remove it. Night had fully arrived by the time they left the cemetery. Lanterns glowed warmly beneath the temple eaves. The familiar scent of cedar smoke drifted through the cool air. Halfway down the path, Kenji stopped. Master, if our names disappear and our bodies return to the earth, what truly continues? The monk did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the sky. Thousands of stars now shimmered above the mountain. Finally, he smiled. Tomorrow, I will tell you the story that my own teacher told me, the story that changed everything. He rested one hand gently upon Kenji's shoulder. It begins. With a single breath, the two figures continued toward the temple. Behind them, The nameless stone remained beneath the maple tree, silent, unmoving, patient, as it had been for generations. How often do we worry about being remembered? We hope our names will last, that our accomplishments will endure, that someone, somewhere, will speak of us long after we are gone. Yet the quietest gifts in this world are often given by people whose names we will never know. The hands that planted forests, the builders of old bridges, the strangers who offered kindness without expecting recognition. Perhaps a meaningful life has never depended on being remembered. Perhaps it depends on becoming the kind of person whose compassion continues to shape the world, even after the name has faded. Tonight, as you rest, imagine walking through that silent cemetery beneath the cedar trees. Notice the nameless stone. Notice how peaceful it stands. No title, no fame, no story carved upon its surface. And yet, it reminds every traveler of something precious, that what truly matters may never need to be written in stone. Long before dawn, the temple remained wrapped in silence. No lanterns burned. No birds had begun their morning songs. The entire mountain seemed suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. Kenji awoke to the soft sound of wooden sandals outside his room. He opened the sliding door. The old monk stood waiting. His robe stirred gently in the cool mountain breeze. Without speaking, he handed Kenji a small lantern. Its flame was no larger than a single blossom. "It is time," the monk whispered. Together, they began climbing the narrow trail behind the temple. The climb was steeper than any they had taken before. Ancient roots crossed the path like old memories refusing to disappear. The forest gradually became thinner. Tall cedars gave way to low pines, bent by decades of winter winds. The air grew colder. Each breath appeared as a small cloud before fading into darkness. Neither man hurried. Each footstep landed softly upon the earth. At one point, Kenji looked back. The temple had disappeared beneath a sea of mist. Only the highest rooftops floated like small islands among white clouds. "It feels," he whispered, "as though the world has vanished." The monk smiled. "Sometimes we must climb above what is familiar, before we can see clearly." Just before sunrise, they reached the summit. It was little more than a broad circle of weathered stone overlooking the endless mountains. The eastern horizon glowed with the faintest hint of gold. Everything else remained blue, still, silent. The monk extinguished the lantern. "We will not need this anymore." For several minutes, neither spoke. The mountain itself seemed to be breathing, slowly, patiently. Then, the monk broke the silence. "My teacher came here on the final morning of his life." Kenji looked toward him. "He knew?" The monk nodded. His body had become very weak, but his mind remained perfectly clear. "He asked me to help him climb this mountain one last time. When we reached this very place," the monk continued, "I was frightened. I had never seen someone so close to death. I wanted answers. I wanted certainty." He smiled softly. "So I asked him the question that had lived inside my heart for many years. What happens after your last breath?" The wind moved gently across the summit, carrying with it the fragrance of pine and snow. My teacher did not answer. Kenji listened without moving. He simply asked me, "Tell me, where does this breath begin?" The monk inhaled slowly. The morning air filled his lungs. "Does it belong to you?" I did not know what to say. The old monk closed his eyes. For a long while, my teacher and I sat together in silence. We listened to the wind, to distant birds, to our breathing. Finally, he spoke again. "When you inhale, can you separate your breath from the air of the mountain?" The young monk I once was, answered, "No. When you exhale, can you command where that breath will go again?" "No." My teacher smiled. "Then tell me, which breath has ever truly been yours?" Kenji felt something inside him become perfectly still. He watched his own breath disappear into the cool morning air. Each inhalation arrived without effort. Each exhalation departed without permission. The monk continued. Life enters you. Life leaves you. You participate in it, but you do not own it. As the final words faded, the first edge of the sun appeared above the horizon. Golden light spilled slowly across the sea of clouds. The mountains awakened one ridge at a time. Snow-covered peaks glowed like quiet fire. The monk watched in silence. My teacher lifted one trembling hand toward the sunrise. He whispered, "Watch carefully. The sun does not rise." Kenji looked surprised. "But it appears to." The monk nodded. "Exactly." My teacher smiled. "Your eyes tell one story. Reality tells another." He paused. "In the same way, people believe life begins at birth and ends with death. But perhaps those are only the places where our eyes first notice the journey." The words drifted gently across the morning air, not as an explanation, but as an invitation. The monk's voice grew softer. My teacher closed his eyes. He took one slow breath, then another. There was no struggle, no fear, no attempt to hold on. He simply rested. The mountain breeze moved quietly through the grasses. A small bird landed beside him. It remained there, as though it, too, had come to say farewell. The monk smiled. My teacher opened his eyes one final time. He looked at me, and he laughed. Kenji blinked. "He laughed?" The monk nodded. A quiet laugh, the kind that comes when someone finally understands something words cannot carry. What did he say? The old monk looked toward the endless horizon. He whispered only this: "Do not spend your life trying to solve death. Spend it learning how to be fully alive." Then he exhaled, and no further breath came. Kenji waited, almost expecting something extraordinary, a light, a vision, some heavenly sign. Instead, the monk continued quietly. The wind kept moving. The birds kept singing. The sun continued climbing into the sky. The mountain did not become sad. It simply welcomed another morning. Kenji lowered his eyes. So, what happened after his last breath? The monk remained silent for a very long time. Finally, he answered, "I do not know, and neither does anyone who speaks honestly." Kenji looked up. The answer surprised him. The monk smiled gently. "But I do know what happened. Before it, he loved, he served, he forgave, he learned to let go. And because of that, his final breath carried no fear. The morning sunlight warmed the stone beneath their feet. For the first time since beginning his journey, Kenji no longer felt desperate to know what waited beyond death. Instead, he found himself wondering something entirely different. How should he live before that final breath ever arrived? Perhaps the deepest question is not, "What happens after my last breath?" Perhaps it is, "What am I doing with this breath?" The Buddha repeatedly invited people back to the present moment, not because the future is unimportant, but because this breath is the only one we are ever truly experiencing. The next breath has not yet come. The previous breath has already gone. Only this one, quietly entering, quietly leaving, is here, tonight. As you become more relaxed, notice your breathing. There is nothing to control, nothing to force, only the gentle rhythm of life moving through you, just as it moves through the forests, the rivers, the mountains, and every living being beneath the same sky. Rest here for a while. One calm breath, then another, and perhaps that is where peace begins. Another morning unfolded gently upon the mountain. The temple roofs glistened beneath a thin veil of dew. Tiny drops of water clung to every blade of grass. Each one reflected the rising sun like a small jewel. The valley below was waking. Smoke curled upward from distant cottages. A shepherd guided his flock across green hillsides. The world continued its quiet rhythm, just as it always had. Kenji and the old monk sat together beneath the great cedar tree overlooking the eastern cliffs. Between them rested a simple clay teapot. Steam rose lazily into the cool morning air. For a long while, neither spoke. Kenji watched the mist slowly dissolve beneath the growing light. At last, he turned toward the monk. "Master, if no one truly knows what happens after the final breath, why did the Buddha speak so often about death?" The old monk smiled. He did, but perhaps not in the way most people imagine. He poured tea into 2 small cups. The Buddha rarely encouraged people to chase questions that could not free the heart. Kenji frowned gently. "What do you mean?" The monk looked toward the distant mountains. "Let me tell you about a man who once asked the Blessed One almost the very same question. Long ago, during the lifetime of the Buddha, there lived a monk whose mind was never still. He meditated faithfully. He observed every discipline. He listened carefully to every teaching. Yet one question refused to leave him. What happens after death? The question followed him like his own shadow, while others practiced mindfulness. He imagined unseen worlds, while others cultivated compassion. He debated endless theories. Some monks believed one thing, others believed another. The more he searched, the less peaceful he became. Finally, he approached the Buddha. The monk bowed respectfully. Then he spoke. "Blessed One, I wish to know, does a person exist after death, or do they not? Is the soul eternal, or does everything simply disappear? If I cannot know these things, how can I truly walk this path?" The Buddha looked upon him with quiet kindness. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked a question of his own. "My friend, if a man were struck by a poisoned arrow, would he refuse treatment until every question had been answered?" The monk looked puzzled. "I do not understand." The Buddha continued. "Imagine a man lies upon the ground. The poison is already entering his body. The physician arrives. But, the wounded man says, 'First tell me, who shot the arrow? Was he young or old, tall or short? From which village did he come? What wood was the arrow made from? What feathers were tied to its end? Who crafted the bow?" The Buddha paused. The forest around them remained completely still. "What would happen?" The monk answered quietly. "He would die before receiving help." The Buddha nodded. "Exactly." The old monk looked toward Kenji. The Buddha was not saying that questions are wrong. He was asking something deeper. Which question frees the heart? The breeze carried the scent of pine across the hillside. Kenji remained silent. The monk continued. "We often spend years asking, what happens after death? Why was I born? What will become of me? What existed before this life?" He smiled gently. "Meanwhile, anger still lives within us. Fear still guides our choices. Kindness waits for tomorrow." The old monk picked up a fallen cedar needle, holding it lightly between his fingers. "If your house were burning, would you first debate the color of the flames?" Kenji smiled faintly. "No, you would leave the house." The monk nodded. The Buddha invited people to remove the arrow first, then asked the questions that remained. For several minutes, only the birds spoke. Finally, Kenji whispered. "What is the arrow?" The monk looked at him with extraordinary gentleness. "It is different for everyone. For one person, it is anger. For another, regret. For someone else, fear." He paused. "And for many, it is the illusion that happiness will begin someday. If only life becomes different." Kenji lowered his eyes. He thought about the stone he had carried, about the guilt surrounding his father, about all the nights he had searched for certainty instead of peace. Perhaps he had been asking questions, while ignoring the wound itself. The monk rose slowly. Together, they walked along the ridge. After a short distance, they came upon an enormous pine tree that had fallen during a winter storm. Its roots stretched high into the air, exposed, twisted. The trunk blocked part of the old path. Tiny green shoots already emerged from the moss growing upon its bark. The monk rested his hand upon the fallen tree. This pine stood here for nearly 300 years. One storm, and it fell. He smiled. "Look carefully." Kenji knelt. Between cracks in the bark, tiny ferns had begun to grow. Insects moved quietly beneath the fallen wood. Birds searched for seeds among the branches. Life had not ended. It had simply changed its form. The monk continued. If the tree spent its final years asking, "When will the storm come?" it would still have fallen, but because it spent those years growing, it now gives shelter, even in death. As they walked back toward the temple, the old monk asked, "Tell me, what is your next breath doing?" Kenji smiled. "It is arriving. And your previous breath?" "It is gone." The monk nodded. "Then perhaps this one deserves your attention." The words felt wonderfully simple, not incomplete, not mysterious, simply true. There are questions that expand the mind, and there are questions that heal the heart. Sometimes they are the same. Sometimes they are not. The Buddha did not discourage curiosity. He simply reminded us not to become so fascinated by distant mysteries that we forget the suffering already within our reach. Tonight, as your body becomes heavier and your breathing slower, notice whether there is an arrow you have been carrying. Perhaps it is an old disappointment, perhaps a fear that has visited for many years, perhaps a conversation you continue replaying in silence. You do not have to solve the entire mystery of life tonight. You do not have to understand every beginning or every ending. Perhaps it is enough to begin removing the arrow. One gentle breath, one act of forgiveness, one moment of kindness at a time. Outside, the evening wind moved softly through the cedar branches. Inside the quiet temple, the tea had grown cold, yet neither Kenji nor the old monk seemed to mind. Some conversations needed no conclusion, only silence. Morning arrived quietly, no dramatic sunrise, no mist rolling across distant mountains, no remarkable sign from heaven, only another ordinary day. The temple roofs glistened faintly from the night's dew. A pair of sparrows hopped across the wooden steps. Somewhere nearby, water dripped steadily from a bamboo pipe into a stone basin. Drop, pause, drop, pause. The sound seemed almost too simple to notice. Yet, once Kenji became aware of it, he could not imagine the morning without it. He stepped into the courtyard. The old monk was already there. No scriptures rested beside him. No incense burned. No visitors had arrived seeking wisdom. The monk simply held two old bamboo brooms. One he kept, the other he handed to Kenji, without explanation. The courtyard was already clean. At least, it appeared that way. Only a few cedar needles rested upon the stone path. Several yellow leaves had fallen during the night. A handful of tiny pebbles lay near the entrance gate. Kenji looked around. There is almost nothing to sweep. The monk smiled. Then today will be easy. Together. They began. The dry bamboo bristles whispered gently across the stone. Shh, shh. Neither hurried, neither spoke. The rhythm became strangely calming. Each stroke flowed into the next. Like breathing, like waves touching a quiet shore. After several minutes, Kenji noticed something. No matter how carefully they swept, another breeze always arrived. Another leaf drifted down. Another pine needle appeared. He sighed softly. It never stays clean. The monk nodded. No, just then, a young novice hurried across the courtyard carrying a bucket of water. He stopped abruptly when he saw the two men sweeping. His face turned red. Oh, I should have done this before sunrise. I am sorry. He quickly reached for another broom. The old monk raised one hand. There is no need. The boy looked confused. But master, the courtyard is untidy. The monk smiled. So is the forest. The novice blinked. He looked toward the trees. Leaves covered the earth in every direction. Birds scattered twigs wherever they pleased. The wind arranged nothing neatly. The monk continued. We sweep, not because the courtyard demands perfection. We sweep, because sweeping trains the heart. The boy bowed deeply, then quietly continued on his way. As the morning wore on, the sun climbed higher. Its warm light filtered through the cedar branches. One golden maple leaf loosened from the tree overhead. It drifted lazily through the air, turning, floating, almost dancing. Finally, it landed directly upon the freshly swept stones. Kenji instinctively walked toward it. The monk stopped him. Wait. Together, they simply watched. The leaf rested quietly where it had fallen. Its golden color glowed beneath the morning light. The old monk asked, "Does it look out of place?" Kenji studied it carefully. No. It looks beautiful. The monk smiled. A few moments ago, you wished to remove it. What changed? Kenji thought for a long time. Then he answered, I finally looked at it. The monk nodded. Many people spend their lives trying to remove what they have never truly seen. When they finished, the courtyard looked almost exactly as it had before. A few leaves remained. Several birds immediately landed near the gate. The breeze continued carrying tiny cedar needles onto the stones. Nothing was permanent. The monk rested his broom against the temple wall. Tell me, what did we accomplish? Kenji hesitated. I don't know. The courtyard will become untidy again. Yes, and tomorrow we will probably sweep again. The monk laughed softly. Exactly. He sat upon the wooden steps, gesturing for Kenji to join him. There are people who believe peace is something they will finally reach. They imagine one perfect day, when every problem disappears, when every relationship becomes easy, when every fear leaves forever. He looked across the quiet courtyard. But the mind is much like this place. Leaves continue falling. Thoughts continue appearing. Memories continue visiting. Our task is not to stop the wind. It is to learn how to sweep. The monk prepared tea beneath the open sky. This time, neither of them spoke while drinking. A butterfly wandered through the garden. The bamboo fountain continued its gentle rhythm. A squirrel darted across the old stone wall before disappearing into the pines. Nothing extraordinary happened, and yet, nothing seemed missing. Kenji realized something surprising. This might have been the happiest morning since arriving at the temple, not because he had discovered a great secret, not because all his grief had vanished, but because, for a little while, he had stopped measuring the moment against some imagined better one. The tea was warm, the breeze was cool, The mountain was quiet. That was enough. As they prepared to leave, Kenji noticed that the monk's broom had been repaired many times. The wooden handle bore several careful bindings made from dark hemp cord. It would be easier to replace it, Kenji said. The monk smiled. It would. Then why keep it? The old monk ran his fingers gently along the worn wood. This broom has swept these stones for more than 30 years. It has grown old beside me. He looked toward Kenji. If something still serves with kindness, why should age make it less worthy? Kenji remembered the old cherry tree, the weathered boat, the nameless grave. Every lesson seemed quietly connected. Nothing needed to remain perfect, only useful, only true. As the sun reached its highest point, the temple bell sounded. One deep note rolled across the valley, not announcing sorrow, not celebrating joy. Simply marking another passing hour, Kenji listened carefully. This time, he did not follow the echo. He allowed it to come and allowed it to go. The monk noticed. You did not chase the sound. Kenji smiled. It knew the way. The old monk laughed. So do most things. If we stop trying to hold them, life is filled with ordinary mornings. Most of them pass unnoticed. We wait for remarkable moments, for extraordinary achievements, for perfect happiness. Meanwhile, a cup of warm tea grows cold. A bird sings from a nearby branch. A leaf dances through the sunlight. And an ordinary day quietly becomes a treasured memory. The Buddha often pointed toward the simplest moments, walking, eating, breathing, sweeping the ground, not because these acts are small, but because they are where life is actually happening. Tonight, as your eyes become heavier, imagine yourself sitting in that peaceful temple courtyard. Feel the smooth bamboo broom in your hands. Hear the gentle whisper of its bristles against the stone. Notice the single golden leaf resting where it chose to fall. There is nothing to hurry, nothing to complete, nothing to become. Only this quiet moment, exactly as it is, and perhaps exactly as it has always been. That evening, summer announced itself quietly. The last traces of spring had disappeared from the mountain. The air felt warmer. The breeze carried the sweet fragrance of wild jasmine growing along the forest paths. Above the temple, the sky deepened into a rich shade of indigo. One by one, the first stars appeared, small, patient, ancient. Kenji sat alone beneath the temple gate. For a long while, he simply watched the darkness slowly gather across the valley. The old monk approached carrying 2 small woven cushions. Without speaking, he placed one beside Kenji. Then he looked toward the valley below. It is time. They descended a narrow path that wound gently through the forest. Night birds called softly from unseen branches. Crickets had already begun their evening song. The sound rose and fell like distant breathing. Soon, the trees opened. Before them stretched a wide meadow beside a quiet stream. Tall grasses swayed gently beneath the night sky. Tiny white flowers shimmered beneath the moonlight for several moments. Nothing seemed unusual. Then, a tiny point of green light appeared. Another, then another. Within minutes, hundreds of fireflies floated above the meadow. Their soft lights blinked quietly in the darkness, like stars that had drifted down to earth. Kenji stopped walking, his breath caught. I've never seen so many. The monk smiled. Neither have I. Kenji looked surprised. But surely, you've come here before, many times. Then how? The old monk laughed gently. Because no 2 nights are ever the same. As they sat in the tall grass. A small boy ran into the meadow carrying a glass jar. His laughter echoed through the warm night air. Each time, a firefly drifted close. He carefully caught it. Soon, the jar glowed with dozens of tiny lights. The boy smiled proudly. "Look," he called to his grandmother standing nearby. "I caught the stars." The old woman smiled kindly. "You did, but tell me, will they still shine tomorrow?" The boy looked into the jar. The fireflies fluttered desperately against the glass. Their gentle rhythm had become hurried, uneasy. The boy frowned. "I don't know." His grandmother knelt beside him. What if the stars were happier in the sky? The little boy remained quiet. After a long moment, he slowly opened the lid, one by one. The fireflies rose back into the night. They did not rush away. They simply returned to the meadow. The child watched them disappear. For a brief instant, sadness crossed his face. Then something softer, wonder. "They're prettier now," he whispered. The grandmother nodded. Some beautiful things become brighter when they are free. The old monk waited until the child had gone. Then he turned toward Kenji. "Have you ever noticed how often people close their hands when they discover something precious?" Kenji looked down at his own hands. The monk continued. "We grasp youth. We grasp love. We grasp success. We grasp happiness, as though holding more tightly could prevent change." A single firefly landed upon the monk's sleeve. Its tiny light pulsed slowly, bright, soft, bright again. The monk did not move. After several breaths, the firefly lifted into the night once more. "I never asked it to stay," he said quietly. The monk picked up a slender blade of grass, rolling it gently between his fingers. There was once an old painter. He spent 60 years trying to paint moonlight. Kenji smiled. "Moonlight?" The monk nodded. He painted mountains, lakes, bamboo forests, snow, but every time he felt something was missing. One evening, his granddaughter asked him, "Grandfather, why not simply sit beneath the moon?" The monk chuckled softly. The old painter laughed. He put away his brushes, and for the rest of his life, he watched the moon without trying to possess it. A single firefly drifted toward Kenji. It hovered just above his open hand. Its tiny light reflected in his eyes. Instinctively, he wanted to cup his hands around it. Instead, he remembered the little boy. He remained still. The firefly lingered for several quiet breaths, then floated away. To his surprise, he did not feel disappointed. He felt grateful because it had come at all. The monk noticed the smile upon his face. What changed? Kenji answered softly. "I realized the moment wasn't mine. It simply visited me." The old monk bowed his head. Exactly. The night grew deeper. More stars appeared overhead. Soon, it became impossible to distinguish where the heavens ended, and the fireflies began. The meadow shimmered with countless tiny lights, some near, some far away, some lasting only a heartbeat before fading again. The monk looked upward. When people ask, "Why does beauty disappear?" they are asking the wrong question. Kenji listened. A better question is, "How wonderful that I was here to witness it." The words settled over the meadow like dew upon grass. Neither man spoke again. There was nothing more to add, only the quiet blinking of tiny lights, appearing, disappearing, appearing again, not asking to be remembered, simply shining. As they returned toward the temple, the meadow slowly disappeared behind them. The fireflies became fewer, then only a handful remained. Finally, darkness embraced the valley once more. Kenji looked back, one last time. He could no longer see a single light. Yet strangely, the meadow felt brighter inside his memory than it ever had before. The monk walked beside him. "Tell me, are the fireflies gone?" Kenji thought carefully. "From the meadow, perhaps, but not from tonight." The monk smiled. "And tonight will one day become another memory." Kenji nodded. "Yes, then treasure it, but do not try to keep it. Some of the most beautiful moments in our lives stay only briefly. The laughter of a child, the fragrance after summer rain, a quiet conversation beneath the stars, the embrace of someone we love. Like fireflies, they arrive without warning and leave without asking permission. Our suffering often begins when we confuse appreciation with possession. We believe that if something is beautiful, it must remain. Yet nature whispers another truth. Beauty does not ask to be owned. It asks only to be witnessed with an open heart. Tonight, as you become more relaxed, imagine yourself sitting in that quiet meadow. Feel the warm summer breeze. Hear the gentle murmur of the nearby stream. Watch a single firefly drift through the darkness. Do not reach for it. Simply watch. Simply smile. Simply be grateful that for one small moment its light crossed your path. And perhaps that has always been enough. Later that night, as they reached the temple, Kenji noticed something unusual. The old monk paused before the wooden gate. He turned, not toward the meditation hall, but toward the path leading away from the temple. The path Kenji had first climbed many days before. The monk looked into the darkness with a gentle smile. Then he said quietly, "Tomorrow, your journey continues." Kenji felt his heart tighten. "Am I leaving?" The old monk nodded. Every guest eventually becomes a traveler once again. As the temple bell echoed softly through the night, Kenji realized that the greatest lesson of the mountain might not be found in staying, but in learning how to leave with gratitude. The final morning arrived quietly. No bell announced it. No voice called it by name. The mountain simply awakened, as it had awakened countless mornings before. Mist drifted gently through the cedar trees. The first rays of sunlight touched the highest branches. A single robin sang somewhere beyond the temple wall. Its song floated through the cool air, then disappeared into silence. Kenji opened the sliding door of his small room. Everything looked exactly as it had on the first day. The folded blanket, the wooden bowl, the paper window glowing softly with morning light. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different, especially himself. Before leaving, Kenji carefully folded the blanket he had used each night. He smoothed every crease, placed it exactly where he had first found it. Then he bowed quietly toward the empty room, not because anyone was watching, but because gratitude had become as natural as breathing. He remembered the frightened young single who had climbed this mountain. A man desperate for answers, afraid of endings, afraid of silence, afraid of his own thoughts. That young man still existed, yet somehow he no longer carried the same weight. Outside, the old monk was sweeping the courtyard, just as he had done every morning. The bamboo broom whispered gently across the stone. Shh, shh. A few fresh cedar needles had fallen during the night. Several yellow leaves rested beside the old stone lantern. The monk looked up. "You packed lightly." Kenji smiled. "I arrived with very little, and I leave with even less." The old monk laughed softly. "Good. There is more room that way." Together, they swept the courtyard one final time. Neither tried to make the moment important. Neither hurried. It felt like every other morning, And perhaps that was what made it beautiful. The kitchen smelled of steamed rice and roasted tea. The novice, who had once worried about the untidy courtyard, greeted Kenji with a bright smile. "You are leaving today." "I am." The young novice looked disappointed. "I hoped you might stay longer." Kenji looked around the simple room. "I did too." The old monk poured tea into 3 cups. Then he spoke. "Every guest believes another day would be enough." He smiled, then another, and another. The novice laughed. "I suppose that is true." The monk nodded. "The heart is rarely ready to say goodbye." After breakfast, Kenji prepared to leave. He reached for the straw sandals he had worn when climbing the mountain weeks before. To his surprise, they had been carefully repaired. The worn straps had been replaced, the torn soles reinforced with fresh woven fibers. He looked toward the old monk. "You repaired them." The monk shrugged gently. They still had many roads left. Kenji ran his fingers across the careful stitching. "So do people," the monk answered. Neither of them spoke again. Sometimes, the smallest acts carried the deepest meaning. As they approached the temple gate, the old monk stopped from inside his sleeve. He removed something wrapped in faded linen. It was small enough to fit into the palm of a hand. Kenji accepted it carefully. Inside rested a single smooth river stone. He smiled. "The stone," the monk nodded. "The river gave it back." Kenji laughed softly. "I thought it had carried it away." "It did," the monk said. "But this is another stone." Kenji looked closer. It resembled the first one almost perfectly. Yet no 2 stones shaped by a river are ever truly the same. The monk continued. "Keep it, not as a burden, but as a reminder." "Of what?" The old monk looked toward the flowing stream below the temple. "When your hand begins closing too tightly, open it. When fear becomes heavy, hold this stone. And remember, the river never stopped moving." They stood together beneath the old wooden gate. The path leading down the mountain stretched quietly into the forest. It looked exactly as it had on the day Kenji arrived. Yet, today, it no longer seemed lonely. Kenji hesitated. "Master, I came here searching for an answer." "Did you find one?" the monk asked. Kenji remained silent. After a long while, he smiled. "I don't think so." The monk's eyes sparkled. "Good." Kenji looked surprised. "I expected you to say that." The monk chuckled. "Answers often become walls, but good questions become doors." He stepped closer. "When you first arrived, you asked, 'What happens after the final breath?'" Kenji nodded. "And today, what question lives in your heart?" Kenji looked toward the valley. Morning sunlight spread slowly across fields and rivers. Farmers had already begun their work. Children's laughter drifted faintly from a distant village. Birds circled high above the trees. Life everywhere. "Finally," he answered. "How can I make this breath worthy?" The old monk closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then he bowed deeply. "Now, you are asking with your whole life." Kenji stepped beyond the temple gate. One step, then another. The forest welcomed him once again. The same cedar trees, the same winding path, the same birds. Yet each sound felt clearer, each scent richer, each breath deeper. Halfway down the mountain, he turned around. The temple stood quietly among the trees, almost hidden. The old monk remained beneath the gate, one hand resting upon the bamboo broom. The distance between them was already great. Still, Kenji could somehow feel the monk smiling. He bowed one final time. The monk returned the bow. Then, without another gesture, He resumed sweeping the courtyard, as though nothing extraordinary had happened, because perhaps nothing extraordinary had. A traveler had arrived, a traveler had departed, the mountain remained. Every journey eventually becomes a memory. Every meeting becomes a farewell. Every teacher one day watches a student continue alone. This is not a tragedy. It is the quiet rhythm of life itself. The Buddha did not ask his students to remain beside him forever. He encouraged them to walk into the world, carrying wisdom not as words, but as a way of living. Tonight, imagine yourself standing beneath that old wooden temple gate. The path stretches before you. You do not know everything that awaits. You never will. Yet your feet are steady, your breathing is calm, and somewhere behind you, a bell rings softly through the morning air, not to call you back, but to bless the road ahead. Carry kindness, carry patience, carry awareness, and when the path becomes difficult, remember the river, remember the cherry blossom, remember the fireflies, remember the nameless stone. Above all, remember this breath, because it is here that every journey truly begins. The mountains slowly disappeared behind him with every step. The temple became smaller. The cedar trees merged into the forest. The temple bell, so clear only moments before, faded into the quiet distance. Kenji did not feel alone. For the first time in many years, silence no longer felt empty. It felt like gentle company. The morning sun warmed the winding road. Wildflowers nodded softly in the breeze. Somewhere nearby, a stream continued its endless conversation with the stones. The world had not changed, only the eyes through which he now saw it. Near the foot of the mountain, Kenji noticed a little boy kneeling beneath an old plum tree. The child could not have been more than 8 years old. Beside him, the earth had been freshly turned. A small mound of soil rested beneath a circle of white field flowers. Next to it lay a worn leather collar. Its tiny bronze bell no longer made a sound. The boy wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. He looked up as Kenji approached. "My dog," he whispered. "He died this morning." Kenji knelt beside him. Neither spoke for a while. The breeze moved gently through the grass. Somewhere high above, a skylark sang, life continuing quietly. The boy picked up the little collar, holding it carefully in both hands. "Do you think?" he asked in a trembling voice. "But he knows I loved him." Kenji felt his heart become very still. Weeks ago, he would have searched desperately for the right answer. He might have spoken about heaven, or rebirth, or ancient teachings. Today, none of those words came. Instead, he remembered the old monk sitting beside the river. He remembered the nameless grave, the fireflies, the mountain at sunrise, the broom sweeping the courtyard, the final breath. He smiled gently, then asked, "What was your dog's name?" The little boy looked surprised. "Kumo." "Cloud." Kenji smiled. "A beautiful name. What was Kumo like?" Kenji asked. The child's face softened immediately. "He always waited for me after school. He was afraid of thunder. He loved chasing butterflies, even though he never caught them." A tiny laugh escaped through the tears. "He always slept beside my bed. He followed me everywhere." As the boy spoke, something changed. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. The sorrow remained. But now, it rested beside love, not apart from it. Kenji listened, without interruption, without trying to repair what could not be repaired. When the boy finished, Kenji looked toward the little grave, then quietly said, "I do not know what happens after death." The child lowered his eyes. "I don't know either." Kenji nodded. But I know this: no love is wasted. The wind stirred the white flowers upon the small grave. The kindness you gave Kumo already became part of the world. It changed the way he lived. And perhaps it has already begun changing the way you will live. The little boy held the old collar against his chest. It feels strange, he whispered. The bell doesn't ring anymore. Kenji gently turned the tiny bronze bell between his fingers. It has become quiet. Yes, but tell me, when Kumo ran beside you, did you love the sound? Or did you love Kumo? The child answered immediately. Kumo. Kenji smiled. The bell helped you notice him, but it was never the reason you loved him. The boy looked at the silent collar once more, then slowly nodded. Perhaps not every silence meant something had disappeared. Sometimes silence simply asked us to remember differently. Just then, a white feather drifted slowly through the air. Neither of them saw where it came from. It floated gently downward, turning once, twice, before resting beside the little grave. The boy reached toward it, then stopped. Instead, he simply watched. Kenji noticed. You let it stay. The boy smiled faintly. It looked happy there. Kenji laughed softly. It does. The road toward the village stretched ahead. The little boy stood, brushing the earth from his knees. Will you walk with me? He asked. I'd like that, Kenji replied. Together, they followed the narrow road. The child spoke about Kumo, about school, about fishing with his grandfather, about the birds nesting near his house. Kenji listened. The old version of himself would have searched for profound words. Now, he discovered that listening was often the greatest kindness. As they reached the edge of the village, a warm breeze swept across the fields. Rice plants rippled like gentle waves. The child suddenly stopped. He closed his eyes, smiling. It smells like summer. Kenji closed his eyes too. He breathed deeply. The same breeze had touched the temple, the cedar forest, the river, the meadow of fireflies, the mountain summit, the nameless grave. Perhaps it had even touched the old monk. Without thinking, Kenji whispered, "Thank you," not to anyone in particular, perhaps to life itself. The boy waved goodbye, running toward a small wooden house where his mother waited by the gate before entering. He turned around. "Do you think," he called, "I'll stop missing him?" Kenji smiled. "I hope not." The child looked puzzled. Why? Because missing someone is another way love reminds us that it was real. The boy thought about those words, then nodded. Before disappearing through the gate, Kenji continued alone. Yet he no longer felt alone. Each step echoed with quiet gratitude, not because he had solved the mystery of death, but because he had finally learned how to walk beside life. Perhaps you began this journey hoping for certainty, a clear answer, a glimpse beyond the final breath. Instead, you found a quiet mountain, an old monk, a flowing river, a weathered boat, a nameless stone, a bamboo broom, fireflies beneath the summer stars, a child saying goodbye to a faithful friend. None of them claimed to explain death, yet together they gently pointed towards something deeper. Every breath arrives as a gift. Every meeting is temporary. Every goodbye carries the hidden shape of gratitude. The Buddha did not ask us to fear impermanence. He invited us to awaken within it, to love without clinging, to serve without seeking reward, to forgive before it is too late, to sit quietly beneath the changing sky, knowing that change has never been the enemy, only the rhythm of life itself. Tonight, as you settle into rest, notice your breathing once more. No need to count, No need to control. Simply feel the gentle rising and falling of each breath. One day, a final breath will come, just as it comes for every leaf, every bird, every mountain stream, every human heart. Until then, may each ordinary breath become an opportunity to be fully present, to be deeply kind, to walk gently upon this earth. And when the wind someday carries your own story beyond the horizon, may the love you have given continue moving quietly through the lives of others, like fireflies glowing in the darkness, like cedar trees offering shade, like a bell whose echo remains long after the sound has faded. Good night. May you sleep peacefully, and may tomorrow's first breath be welcomed with gratitude.